Welcome to our Wednesday night Objective Secured live stream. I'm Mike, and this is Emma.
I'm Emma.
And we're going to be talking the last Q&A before WATC, or at least before the lists are due. And then we're going to do some the typical random Ask Us Everything type questions that we do every fortnight. Although, sorry, or should I say every second Wednesday, because I've got a couple of friends in the States and Canada who don't know what fortnight means.
Oh, well, here's your little, you learn something every day. A fortnight is another word for 2 weeks.
I had a very confused conversation with Val, who, if he sees this at any point, will know exactly the conversation I'm talking about, because I said, come on to our podcast.
Mm-hmm.
When do you do it? Oh, we release it every fortnight. What's a fortnight? Are you serious right now? Yes.
Yeah, I've had that conversation with someone before. Don't Americans have a word for 2 weeks? Yeah,
2 weeks.
Yeah.
So that was interesting for me to discover. But yeah, that's another thing, I suppose. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
See, we're all about education. Last week we were talking about trying to educate about cricket, and this week it's a fortnight.
Well, we need to try and educate you about cricket last week. Very quickly before we get underway for the topics tonight, if you haven't checked them out already, we have spent the last day uploading all of the previous live streams to YouTube. So if you missed anything, it can be a bit easier.
Trust me, you didn't miss anything.
It can often be easier to find things on YouTube, though, rather than trawling through the Facebook posts.
Yeah.
So they are all on YouTube now. So if you need to go and check anything out from the past live streams, they're all dated. They're all in a playlist as well. So you can go back to back to back.
Did you title them with what we talk about in the actual topic?
No, they're just dated.
All right. Awesome. That should make it so much easier for people to find relevant topics.
We tend to ramble a little bit anyway, so it doesn't matter.
You start with a set topic.
Well, I can go back and edit them later. Anyway, moving on. So we are going to talk all things WATC first. And we've got a bunch of questions here on the iPad so that we can go through and read them out. And we've had some PM stuff come through as well, which we need to probably address as well. And then if anyone joins us, hi Ant, welcome aboard.
Alan and Tim.
Yep. If anyone has any questions while we're going, you're more than welcome to ask them in the chat, in the comments, and then we'll pick them up and answer them as well. We've moved everything around so that Emma can now reach the laptop and not look like she's stretching over.
Not just that I can reach it, I can see it.
Yeah. So we've made a few adjustments. We're both wearing headphones tonight because we've got a new splitter and we've got a mic stand.
I can see, I can hear. It's amazing.
Hey, Tim. How you going, man? So we're going to start. For those of you who aren't aware, there is a secret group that's set aside for the WATC captains. Now, this isn't necessarily anything super secret, secret or private. It's just a case of being able to funnel all information for the captains into one spot.
The idea is that players ask their captains ask in the group, and then captains funnel that information back out to their team. Yeah,
exactly. So if you haven't heard of this, or I've added all the captains to the group, so all the captains have access to it. So if you have any questions for your team, the first place to go is the captain, because it may have been asked in the group. If it hasn't been, then obviously it gives him an opportunity, or her, because we do have a female captain this year. Excuse me, to basically chuck it in the Captain's Council and ask the question so that we can make sure that everyone's on the same page with regards to the answers that come out.
And one of those being on the same page is no nudes, none of the time. Or no nudes all of the time.
Yeah. No, and PG, dude, PG, you'd have to put pasties on.
So, first thing, which we've covered a bazillion times, painting.
Well, this is a good one, though, because I actually had a player today ask me the question, what happens if the bits I've ordered don't turn up and my models have no arms? What do I do then? The answer is you don't get to use them.
You need to have arms.
So,
well, I suppose you don't need to have arms, but your models need to have arms.
How would you move the models?
People have ways of overcoming obstacles.
It's an interesting one. I'm not going to go there because I feel like that could get very unpolitically correct very quickly.
Yeah.
Okay. So, obviously, models have to be fully assembled. 3-color minimum is always the one that's touted. It's not really 3-color minimum. In the Captain's Council, we do have a screenshot that's used from Warhammer World for their painting standards. We're going for the one in the middle.
I'm just cringing at Anne and Richard.
Yeah. What were you expecting?
I know.
So yeah, we're not looking at completely finished models. As long as they have base colors on them and the bases are neat and tidy, you're all good. I might even get a photo of some of my tower that are kind of in that state at the moment where they meet the minimums. Hang on, there's one right here. He's not going to show up very well, but he's panel lined, his base is all finished, and then I've got a separate head that's being painted red, and I'll put some detail on the guns and stuff so he's not just plain white. Yep, you can see all the panel lines on that now, hopefully. Hey, Josh, nice to see you. So base is textured, completed. I've still got to put the static grass on it, but for the purposes of the exercise, it's completed. And then they're all panel lined. They'll get red helmets. The weapons will get some detail on them, and they'd be fine to field at that point because they'd look completed and they match the rest of the army. So the goal is, like we've said many times, it has to look painted from 3 feet away.
Yep.
So have a look. Speak to your captains. The captains can download this image.
It's on our page as well, multiple places. So this is the image that we're talking about, which is released by, oh, you really can't see that very well.
No, the glare.
Released by Games Workshop, which has the different levels of acceptable and not acceptable.
Yeah, so if you've got any questions, speak to your captain, or you're more than welcome to come to us. A few of the captains have come to us direct and said, hey, this is the army, does this pass? Everyone's being overly, I suppose, cautious, because we are taking a very hard and fast rule on this, and captains will have the right to say, no, that's not complete, and ask models to be removed from the table in the event of there being something that doesn't meet the standards. So it's really important that if you've got any questions, ask them early and ask them often, as opposed to waiting till the day and being disappointed. So that, I mean, we've said that plenty of times, so we might as well just move on to some of the questions. So yeah, so we'll start with Kyle.
So Kyle's asked, if one of my players has a mix of plasma gunners and wants to use
Catachan.
Thank you, Catachan Regiment, can he use the plasma gunners and the squad?
So what he's referring to there is he's got Cadian plasma gunners in Catachan squads.
Yeah, that's what I said.
So essentially, it's still a guardsman, it's still on the right size base, and it's got the right weapon. The first question I had for Kyle was, okay, is the whole army Catachan, or is there a Cadian detachment, or are there different regiments? Because the whole army is Cadian, then it doesn't matter. So it means that it just means that the plasma gunners are going to be better dressed than the rest of the Catachan army who are in singlets. He's going to be in a proper military uniform. If he'd come back to me and said no, he's going to be using Cadian army models alongside the Catachan as a different regiment, then obviously that creates an issue because the opponent has to be able to tell them apart. But because they're all Catachan, those models are completely fine. So the key there again is differentiation, so that your opponent knows what's gaining what benefit from what regiment or craft world or chapter or whatever special rule you're getting for those detachments.
Mm-hmm. The next question's one that
we're doing that one last, because
All right,
that's
okay.
about the FAQ. I don't want to talk about that one.
Well, that'd be that one again.
No, that's a different one. So that's from Jake, asking about Dark Eldar, or Drakari as they're now known.
Mm.
So to be 100% clear, the new Necron Codex that was released last Saturday is in.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the new Tau Codex is in as well. That was the week prior.
But the Dark Eldar isn't.
The Dark Eldar is not. Because
that's released Saturday, isn't it?
Yeah, and the list is due Friday.
Yeah.
So if you're using Dark Eldar, you must use the index. You can't access any of the stratagems. You can't access any of the relics. You can't access any of the obsessions or anything else that's in that codex. You may only use the index and the chapter approved book. Sorry. But we have to cut off somewhere. So if you want to play Dark Eldar, you do have to use the index going forward, at least for this event. If and when we see the Tau FAQ, which should be this Saturday, and the Necron FAQ, which should be the week later, those will both be in effect because they'll both be out prior to the event. And to be honest, from what I've seen of the two codexes, there's nothing really that's going to overturn the game for those two particular Tau and Necron books. So once those two FAQs come out, they will be in place and they will be used. But if you're playing Dark Eldar, sorry, you'll have to wait until our next event to run the new codex.
Which will be pretty done soon. So
yeah,
you
which
should
won't be far away.
Yeah. Questions regarding list submissions. As Warlord trait, relics, and power can be selected each round, you don't need to put them on your list, do you?
No, you don't. You have to name your Warlord, and that cannot be changed game to game. That has to be on your list. But Warlord traits, relics, and psychic powers, and anything else in a similar vein like that.
I think we covered before. You can't have a tree as a Warlord.
Yep. All of those
that still stands.
all of those things can be decided on the day. If you want to put them on your list because they're not changing, that's up to you. You won't be held to that. If your opponent sees that you've picked a particular relic on your army list, you're not required to have that every game. It also means that if you want to spend a command point for any of the codexes that have access to it to buy a second relic, you can do that on the fly, essentially.
Question number 2 for that one. Some stratagems say when mustering your army, does that need to be annotated? I can't pronounce that word. I'm
Annotated.
sorry. On your list, or is this just done at the start of your game?
So this particular question referred to the Black Rage stratagem from the Blood Angels, which allows you to basically turn a character into a Death Company model. The long answer is yes, you have to do that as part of your army list. The short answer is yes. Anything like that refers to mustering your army, the only references I can find in the rulebook refer to that as army building steps.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that's going to specifically change a model, I think the Space Marine one that turns them into a chapter master is very similar. I might be wrong because I don't play Space Marines. But anything like that has an effect pre-game at the army list building stage, or that implies it's at the army list building stage, is safe to assume that it has to be done at list building, which means that on your army list you need to have that annotated so that if your captain is using the Black Rage stratagem, then it has to be marked on the army list, paid for as a command point, and noted that you've spent a command point pre-game. So it's really important that you get that right, because that is done at army lists, not at the table.
Awesome.
That last one, which is probably the big scary one, which we should probably talk about.
I was just wondering, do we want to go to... We can come back to that. I'm just trying to get to the private messages. Are they in... I'm sorry, work out how to get to them.
It's my iPad, so it's set up differently. A lot of the other rules questions we've had, we had one for the Gene Stealer cult asking about their mind control psychic power. Does it allow you to circumvent the character targeting rules? Yes, it does. Because it doesn't say you pick an enemy unit and they shoot as if it was the shooting phase. So you just get to pick a unit, pick a weapon, and shoot it, which means you can circumvent the character rule. Essentially, if it says, if any stratagem or any power says, as if it was the other phase, then you're obviously bound by all those restrictions and limitations. If you have something that just says you can shoot, or you can move, or you can do something else, then you can circumvent some of those restrictions. So if you have a power that lets you move as if it was in the movement phase, you still can't come within 1 inch of an enemy model. If you have one that says you may move 6 inches, then you're obviously not bound by that limitation. It's a free movement, not a move as if it was the movement phase. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those have been sort of weeded out and FAQ'd and corrected as the codexes have come out. There are still a few lurking, mostly indexes. Thanks, Steve. The Chapter Master upgrade is worded the same as the extra relic stratagem, which means you can pick that on the day rather than putting it on your army list. Thank you very much for doing that, Steve.
Beautiful. It's very written there.
What FAQ is going to be enforced for the event, because I'm considering running 2 Florence and Swarmlord in my list, but I'm not sure if this will take a hit like Tower Commanders. That's the big question.
That's the one that we're avoiding and putting off till the end of the discussion.
Well, it's going to be a long, long answer to that question, because a lot of
it's not really that long. It kind of goes with the, we don't know.
I've had some information come through about 20 minutes ago, so that I haven't even spoken to you about this yet.
No,
so.
It's always wonderful when it's a surprise for me as well.
The latest information I have seen says that the FAQ will drop on the 7th. Mm-hmm. So that's this Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Saturday. So, and as far as I'm aware, the reason it will drop on that day is it's to do with the new Dark Eldar book and the FAQs, and the stratagems that are in that.
Yeah.
There's been some contention around how one of the previewed stratagems for the Dark Eldar work, which means it's heavily implied that the book will have the limitations that are going to be applied in the FAQ, and obviously it makes no sense to have a book that has those limitations available
without the FAQ available
for everyone else.
Yeah.
So the information I have is that will drop on Saturday,
mm-hmm.
and if I can corroborate that in the next 24 hours or so, we'll probably push list submission back a day just so that we can get that that FAQ. At the moment, I don't see any need to change it. If it drops the next day after army list submission, then obviously we can make some corrections and we can allow teams to make those corrections. If we get too far past the list date, if the event's on the Sunday and the FAQ drops the Saturday, obviously we're not going to use it. If the lists, the lists come out and then we get it on Tuesday or Wednesday the following week, I'm more inclined to say yes, we'll apply it and we'll let people resubmit. That being said, I'm reasonably confident that we'll see it on the 7th.
This is where it gets a little bit tricky, because if we're expecting it to, that's Anthony, that's exactly what I was just going to go to. We're expecting it to go to the 7th. We're going to push list submissions back to the 7th, yet we're still saying that we're not accepting Dark Elder.
The codex entries that we have, or the players pack says that we won't accept codexes after a certain date.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily
talk about
mention
the FAQs.
And the FAQ was obviously one we expected to have prior to this date.
The March FAQ that's now
we're in April.
Yeah.
Which is obviously a factor as well. So I still don't see the Dark Eldar being allowed, because we've only had Necrons a week at that point before list submission. Asking for a Dark Eldar player to write a list and submit it on the day, because with the FAQ dropping, we're only going to be allowing like a 24-hour grace period to submit a list. And while I know that a lot of Dark Eldar players would like that, me included, I think it does a disservice to the event and to the players to have to then accommodate a brand new army with only a couple of weeks' notice. Part of the thing with the WATC is obviously giving teams a chance to go through the other army lists, check them, and do some pre-planning and preparing, and asking them to do that with another new codex when we've just had 2 drop back to back.
Yeah, and
starts getting difficult.
It's the whole FAQ thing is a little bit tricky in itself, because we don't necessarily expect anything massive in the FAQs, but really it's still up in the air. So
certainly the indications from last year indicated that Games Workshop were expecting these FAQs to not change points values, to not do anything dramatic. That was what Chapter Approve was for.
Yeah.
But based on the fact they pushed it back, the feedback they've got from LVO, from Adepticon, from the UK GT heats, it feels like they were ready to push the button, and then Adepticon happened and they went, oh, hang on a minute, we've missed something here, we've missed a trick. And I don't know if Diffie's still watching. He made a comment on one of the other pages that it feels like there was an oh shit moment where Games Workshop went, well, hang on a minute, we completely missed that. We overdid it on one army and underdid it on another, and now they're going to try and balance that out with the FAQ. And he could be right, he could be wrong, who knows?
Yeah.
But I'm inclined to agree that's a fairly likely scenario.
So, Alan, you've asked, what if it requires an entire list to be rebuilt? I think that's one of those kind of cross that bridge when we come to it. If that's a requirement, then we'll have to look at that as an individual case-by-case kind of scenario.
Yeah, I mean, the Players Pack has a section on changing army lists that are illegal, and it does talk about how best to do that. Now, obviously, if you're running 7, oh, hang on, how many can you run? 3, you'd be running 6 Flying Hive Tyrants. Oh no, Al, you could run 9 if you had the points. Correct me if I'm wrong. Supreme Commander, no, you could even run more than that. Anyway, if you are running multiple Flying Hive Tyrants and they limit them down to 2, the Players Pack at the moment says if a list's illegal, you have to spend those points in the same slot, which would mean that you'd be having to spend it on I think Tervagons are still HQ, and Tyranid Primes. I'm more inclined to be a bit lenient in that regard, because it's an unexpected change. It's a bit like if they pump the points up on Dark Reapers and you're running multiple minimum 3-man squads. What we probably do is ask you to balance the units out and drop a squad to, even out the points. It's going to be one of those ones that we suck it and see. But honestly, if it drops on the Saturday,
we'll have plenty of time to
we've got time to work through that with the teams.
Yeah. And as Anthony says, that's exactly right. That's what that week is for, to give us time to kind of work it out.
The Players Pack...
It's not ideal, but it is what it is.
Obviously, the release schedule is playing a big part in this as well. But in the past, we've had to deal with this for different events where army lists and codexes have had to change at very short notice. And the team event, I suppose, adds that extra layer of complexity. So we just have to manage that during that week. And I suppose that's a really good kind of... line to draw in the sand, is that week of corrections. If we do get the FAQ during the week of corrections, then we'll apply it, and anything after that we'll have to put it aside and run it for another event. So hopefully we'll get the book in. Sorry, not the book. Hopefully we'll get the FAQ when I've been indicated it would come out. And if we do, then awesome. If we don't, then I suppose we'll see what happens over the few days that follow that. So Anthony, you're 100% right. There will be people holding their butts. Because if they do drop that and we start seeing limits on Demon Princes and Flyrants and those sorts of armies, then there's definitely going to be some players that have to reconsider their armies and how they're built, which on a personal note, I think actually makes it better for the game. But I know there's plenty of guys out there who like to play it their own way.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who like to know what's happening and have time to, prepare rather than
doing a last minute change.
Flying by the seat of their pants. Yeah.
Are they going to bother FAQing Drukhari, and is this index going to be in a weird limbo? I think I need you give me more information than that, Tim, because the codex isn't out till Saturday. I'm assuming you're referring to the Trueborn and Blood Brides and some of those things, and I can answer that if that's the question.
I guess what I would see is that we're saying that players have to play with the index, not the codex.
For WATC, yeah.
And so are the FAQs going to be for the index? Well, we would assume not. We would assume the FAQ was to do with the codex, in which case is that going to have them in a weird limbo because the FAQs are for information
there is already an FAQ for the Drukhari. There is an index.
So we're saying that regardless of what FAQ drops on Saturday or when it drops, we'll be looking at the FAQ that's out currently, not the new.
Well, it depends on what we get in terms of the FAQ, in terms of...
So it's another... Look, we just got to see. Yeah.
If they're going to...
Look, flying by the seat of our pants is quite often our strategy as well, Tim. So
I suppose the trick is, because this is the first of these FAQs that we all actually have seen, it really depends on whether it's one document that addresses everything, or whether it's an FAQ for the rulebook, an FAQ for the chapter approved, an FAQ for individual codexes. Like if it's a bulk batch of FAQs, that's very different to then applying a one document fits all and just applying it, and it references codexes and indexes and everything like that. I'm inclined to think that it's more likely we'll get multiple FAQs as opposed to one single one. Because of the release schedule. There's no point in putting references to a Death Watch FAQ in there when we know that codex is going to be out probably by the end of May. So it feels like it's a waste of time to start referencing books we know are coming, or indeed that are already out and
are about to be superseded.
Yeah, I mean the Dark Eldar will get their own FAQ 2 weeks prior anyway, which is why the Tau one is due this weekend and the Necron one will be the week later. So they're both still within the period of adjustments and 0 point changes and those sorts of things that's referenced in the players pack. Ultimately we don't know what the format's going to take. We don't know what to expect for this, and unfortunately, of course, the March FAQ is in the lead up to WATC, and the September FAQ is potentially going to happen just prior to show.
Woohoo!
And ATC, of course, as well, which we're hosting this year as well.
ANZTC.
No. It's not.
For God's sake, it was ANZTC a week ago.
I spoke to Diffie about this today, and no, it's still the ATC.
It was him who corrected it.
I know, but no, he and I have had a conversation today, and the ATC stands, and the A just stands for Australia, New Zealand, because it comes off the tongue better as ATC than ANZTC.
It certainly does.
So, so no, it is still the ATC, and I'm really glad he's told me that because it makes it so much easier to talk about, because that's what we've known it for so long. Yeah, look, the FAQ is a really big what if at the moment. And like you guys are winging it for your team strategies at WATC. At the moment, we're going to have to wing it until we see what that release means and have a chance to let the community check it out. And then we'll decide what we're going to do and rule it anyway. So,
okay, we've got a different question here, which is about using...
the counts as.
Yeah, which I think... Did we cover that on one of these, or was it on
this is a really good specific example, though.
Okay,
so beautiful. If we open the picture...
Well, that's awesome, but I can't make it work on the...
No, but anyway. you can read the name of it.
Well, not if I'm pointing it this way.
You're not going to be able to see it on the screen anyway. Courtney, nice to have you.
Yeah, no, I can't read it.
So what this player sent in is a picture of the Malign Portents Moon Clan Fungoid Cave Shaman Snazgar Skint Mullet. I love that name.
It's a stink mullet.
Stink mullet? Skint mullet? I got pretty close.
Yeah, but you did make a mistake.
It doesn't matter. It's still a cool name. And it's essentially a goblin, night goblin shaman for Age of Sigmar.
Anthony, yes, the venue is licensed. Sorry, carry on. I knew the answer to that, so it's okay. All good.
And he's basically said, hey, can I use this as a weird boy for his Orc army? The first thing that I'll apply is Rule of Cool. It's a wicked looking model. I love this model in particular. It's got a lot of character and a lot of detail to it. So on a basic level, I'm up for that. But there's a couple of things that need to be addressed with it. The first thing is it's on too small base. So it needs to go on the bigger size base. It's already on a semi-display base, like sculpted detail anyway. but it probably needs to be just lifted ever so slightly in terms of cork or something else, just to give it a more similar profile to the Orc Weird Boy, because he is quite a big model. We all do conversions and we all manipulate models, and it's not almost, I should say, never for any perceived game advantage.
Yeah.
All three of my ghost kills are converted, but they're all converted in such a way that they're all basically the same shape and profile. They're just leg reposes and that sort of thing. I haven't made them kneeling or cut their legs off to make them half submerged in water or anything silly like that. So I think the rule of cool applies here, where as long as the player puts it on the right size base and makes an effort to just make it that little bit bigger, whether it's a slightly longer staff and a little bit of base build up, I think that that works really well in my opinion. Shane, yeah, he is a really big goblin and he may not have to do any of that. I haven't seen the model in person, but I think it's fantastic to do that sort of thing and make some real character models. I mean, if you're going to run multiple weird boys, you don't want to run the same model again and again and again. She's breaking my iPad.
I touched something.
Alan, yes, submit currently legal lists. That's completely right. And if and when the FAQ comes out, then we'll deal with that then on a case-by-case basis. And as soon as anyone sees it before I do, let me know.
Yep.
Feel free to PM us on the page, or if you've got me as a friend on Facebook, send it to me direct with links. That way we can download it, and you know we've got kids, so we're up at all times of the day and night. So
yes,
one of us will see it, and then we can start the planning, which will mean Emma wakes me up and we start talking. Or if I get it, I won't wake her up because I don't want to die.
No. Good thought there.
Shane, he's almost too big for his 30 on my base. That's good. That means there's only a little bit of work to do to get him the right size for an Orc Weird Boy. And to be honest, again, I don't think many people are complaining that seeing him for that. I think it's a really good model to use. On that, Third Ed Hive Tyrants, they're much smaller than Flyrans now.
Are they legal?
Now, it depends on which version you're talking about with the Hive Tyrants, because the Third Ed ones that I have look like an alien queen. They've got a really big sort of flat crest. They're actually taller, or as tall as the current plastic Hive Tyrant. So if you've got those, they look very similar to the Forge World Flying Hive Tyrant. If you jump on the Forge World website, you'll find them there. Those models are, like I say, comparative to the current models. They'll be completely fine. If you're referencing the Rogue Trader / second edition, I think they were second edition. They weren't Rogue Trader. They were significantly smaller, and they came on 40 mil square bases, so not a 60 mil round because they didn't exist at the time. And they didn't have wings either. So there's a few complications there for using them as Flyrans.
Not 100% sure how they flew, but sure.
If you go down the road of wanting to use that particular model, then yes, there'd be an expectation of making sure it had wings
and on the right
size base, and ideally building that base up to whether it's perched on a rock or something similar, to try and give it the right rough size, shape, and presence. It's the same as using the new Tau Commander kit, the Enforcer Cold Star kit. If you want to use just a standard Crisis Commander who is not in an Enforcer or a Cold Star, then you should be using one of the standard battle suits. If, on the other hand, you're putting an Enforcer on the table, it should be an Enforcer. And they didn't have that differentiation in the index, and now they do. So it's important that you make sure you're using the right size base with the right size model. So, and if you're doing accounts as, then make the effort to
make it look like
make it similar in size and shape. I hope that covers that for you, Bree.
Easy questions. Can you buy objective secured dice?
Yes, we have them. If you are missing dice from your show bags, we will have them with us at WATC. So you can come, we'll have a list, and we'll cross your name off, and we will give you your dice. And we might even be able to hand you an extra bag because they've
taken so damn long.
Yeah, we might be able to sort you out with more dice than you were expecting. They're sets of 16 dice. We've been using them on the YouTube channel, actually, for the 3 games that we've played there so far. And they're the ones that you've probably seen the preview copies we had done. If you came to one of our events last year, you might have a couple of them lurking around. There's 16 in a set, and there's $15 for the set.
Lists are due in this Friday. Yes, they are. Are we on Best Coast pairings again for WATC? No, we're not.
What was that? BCP?
Best Coast pairings.
No, BCP doesn't handle team events, so this will all be pen and paper. But because we're only submitting 1 score sheet per team per round,
fingers crossed, it should be manageable.
It should be pretty straightforward.
If you all finish your games and bring them up to the TO table as soon as you've finished, and don't muck around and chat and clear your table.
Look, while we're on that, that is up to the captains to manage. So
Yes,
the captains really need to be on top of that and ensure that they are chasing their players for scores and then handing those in before they rally the troops and pack everything up for the next round. So the captains really need to be on top of that, because otherwise we're going to get blown out for the time, and we are going to be playing strict dice down, and we don't have the time to muck around. So,
and if everyone leaves it, so what's happened in the past when we were doing paper scorecards before, I would be announcing it over the PA system. You've got X amount of time left to go. This time, it's dice down. I need your scorecards before you pack up your armies. Bring your scorecards up to the TO table so I can enter these scores, which wouldn't happen because they were so busy talking and socializing, which is wonderful. We really want you guys to talk and socialize and make the most of this kind of social opportunity. But if you don't bring me those scorecards and I have to enter all of the scorecards at the same time, 10 minutes after a game has finished, it's going to push everything back.
Yeah, it's really important that everyone's on top of it.
Yeah, because otherwise I'm just going to get really cranky.
And then I have to go home to that.
Yeah.
Don't make me do that.
Yeah.
So captains, it's really important that you do keep an eye on your players. Make sure you get the scores in. On the score sheet, you have to note down how many turns you played on the sheet. I'm not interested in how many battle rounds, because you're going to be scoring your team's sheet.
Mm-hmm.
So the sheet will include a line that says how many turns did you complete. And now it can be a situation where you put down 4 and your opponent puts down 5. That's okay. It's just important we know how many turns you played in a game, because we're trying to essentially...
Is that only captains or for everyone who played?
It's for everyone who played, but it's
I thought so, but that was just the way you...
It's up to the captains to make sure that everyone does that.
Right, okay.
And the reason we're doing that is we're trying to build I suppose a picture of what games are finishing, what games aren't finishing, how many points versus... We obviously will have a bunch of data from the games. We'll have all the army lists, and you can actually go back through and go, okay, cool, we had 2 hyper elite armies with 25 models in each, and they took the full 2 hours and only got 3 turns. And we had 2 horde armies of 100 plus models that got through 6 turns each. What's the disconnect there?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're aiming to achieve, is starting to gather some of that data. And this is the first step in it.
It's also really important when you're filling out the score sheet that up the top of the score sheet, if we're using the same score sheet as last time, it will say Team 1 and Team 2. So you need to make sure that everyone who's in Team 1, you put their name down in the same column where you've put Team 1. Because if you cross them over, it's going to mean that the scores can get messed up, basically.
Yeah, so the score sheet, with the exception of the turn number, because it was something that was decided on after we published the players pack, the score sheet is in the players pack. If you haven't seen it, go and grab it. I think it's the second last page. It's right back there at the back end.
Look at it.
And it'll show you exactly what you need to look at. If you've got any questions, shoot them through to us before the event, and we're happy to answer them. Back to submitting legal lists from Courtney. If a list gets kicked in the balls, do we get a second chance to change it?
That's in the players pack.
I think he's referring to the FAQ again.
Oh, okay. Right,
Florence getting a count of Mortain taken to them. Courtney.
I thought you meant if you made a mistake, do we have a chance to change it?
Look, there will be you'll be required to continue using the codex. So if you've chosen to run 2 detachments of Tyranids, you won't be allowed to change that. But you'll be allowed to make amendments within so say, for example, you're running 4 flying hive tyrants. I'm sure you're probably running something similar in Al's list. You'll be then told, no, say, for example, the FAQ then does say it's 1 for hive tyrant per detachment. You'll have some points to spend in those detachments. And if that means that you're running a battalion and you need to run a second HQ, then yes, you will need to add another HQ choice to make that battalion legal. So you will get the ability to amend things, but you won't necessarily get the ability to outright change codexes. Is this the photo from Bree?
Yes, it is.
That's the 3rd edition Flying Hive Tyrant. Sorry, it's the 3rd edition Hive Tyrant, because I've got that one out in the dungeon.
There are wings, so I'm assuming that's flying as well.
Yeah, that's converted. Looking at it beside the current model, it's roughly the right size. It's got wings. It's on the right size base. It's got the right weapons. That's completely fine. You need to finish the bases. You need to tidy up the base, but other than that, that's completely fine. So I don't think anyone can argue with that.
Yep, sweet.
Yes, Ant, I will put some dice aside for you. Not a problem. We have several thousand of them.
Are you sure he's talking about dice and not beer?
2 sets aside for me. If he wants 2 6-packs, it's going to cost him more than $30. Do upgrades need to be WYSIWYG on models? Adrenal glands, toxin sacs on NIDS, crystal targeting matrix on Eldar serpents. Understand all weapons need to be. Okay. I'll try that again.
Okay.
Yes. Where possible, you should be making sure that all your weapons are WYSIWYG. So if you are running a Tau Commander with 4 fusion guns, it has to have 4 fusion guns. If you're running a Flying Hive Tyrant with Rending Claws and a Venom Cannon, it has to have those. In the case of upgrades, a lot of them aren't necessarily clear. The Tau ones are really weird. You get a whole bunch of little like targeting arrays and radar dishes and stuff like that, which aesthetically I don't like because they break the symmetry on the model, and
oh my God,
I can't deal with that psychologically. And it's the same with things like the crystal targeting matrices and things on Eldar vehicles. There's no real parts for them in the kits. So a lot of those upgrades, I think as long as you're clear on your army list, you'll be okay with. Weapons have to be WYSIWYG because it's important that your opponent knows what guns you've got. But toxin sacs, adrenal glands, targeting matrices, spirit stones, there's no real parts for most of them. So it's hard to enforce it for one and not another army. So as a general rule, I'd say no. As soon as it becomes a weapon option, even if it's a 0-point option, then it needs to be there. So the best one I can think of is Gene Stealers with Scything Talons. They're 0 points. They cost you nothing. But if you want them, model them. Yep, Kyle. I covered that. Hi, everyone.
Bree's very happy. Glad to make someone happy tonight, Bree.
It's funny because our comments that we can see here don't necessarily scroll all the time. So we think there's nothing happening, then we scroll down and there's a bunch of other questions. So keep them coming through though, guys. Don't hate on Steelers. You were actually the army I was thinking of, Courtney. So yes, go and put Scything Talons on them if you want them, you lazy bastard. Because it was actually a conversation that Courtney had with me about ATC. That he was asking me about the Scything Talons, which is what reminded me. So it's his fault that I've just singled him Courtney. Out. So you're welcome, dude. If anyone has any other questions, continue shooting them through in the conversation here. We're more than happy to answer them in regards to WATC.
Did you want to cover the questions that Selby had?
They were the aggressor ones.
Yeah.
This was actually a really interesting question that we got sent through today about Space Marine aggressors. One of them was actually answered in an FAQ, so that was easy.
Sadly, I've moved away. Like, we've got different message. Like, people have messaged Michael personally and people have messaged the page.
Yeah.
Which makes it somewhat tricky to try and get to.
So the main question that Selby had, though, was around the aggressor's Firestorm rule, which allows them to fire twice.
So you don't need me to open it?
No, it's all
good. Oh, sweet.
And I've spoken to a few different people about this, and the general consensus has come down the way I'd initially read it. So that's good. For those of you who aren't aware, the aggressors have a rule that allows them to essentially fire twice in the shooting phase, provided they remain stationary. And there's a few other units that have a similar rule to this, but theirs is slightly worded differently. The most common ones are the Fire Prism and the Leman Russ Battle Tank, which both have the ability to shoot twice, but they have to be done at the same target. The Firestorm rule for the aggressors doesn't require the same target. So the question was, when do I declare targets for their shooting, and how do they get 2 shooting activations, or they only get 1? How does it resolve? The rule allows them to fire twice, not to shoot twice. And I know that sounds like a dumb distinction, but there is a shooting phase, not a firing phase. So essentially, when you elect to fire the aggressors, you declare they're the ones that are shooting. That's their activation in the shooting phase. You then resolve steps, I think it's 2 through 7 of the shooting sequence. So it's choose a target, measure range, check line of sight, roll to hit, roll to wound, roll to save, remove casualties. And then you follow that process a second time.
And fire again.
And fire again, which means you can change targets as long as you still have range and line of sight and all the rest of it. It also means that you shouldn't be rolling all the attacks for double shooting in one volley, because your target may change. And what I mean by that is, if you target a unit that's in front of you that's kind of on the rough edge of your firing limit of range, and they start choosing the models that are closest to you, you could potentially have 1 or more aggressors that are then out of range for the second volley. So it's important that you don't just go, I'm going to fire them twice and pick up all the dice for all of their shooting attacks in one go, because that artificially increases the kill rate, because your second shot is essentially going to be out of range, potentially. So firing twice doesn't mean change the gun's profile from 6 shots to 12 shots. It literally means follow the firing sequence twice. So you can change targets halfway through, because you're following the sequence twice, not simply doubling what you're doing. It was a really good question. It took a long time to go through and find all the references. But based on my reading of it and then talking to a few other people who I trust in regards to this army, because I don't play Space Marines, everyone came to roughly the same conclusions. There were a few conversations around some of the nitty-gritty, but essentially the general agreement was exactly what we just described. Cool. So it's a nice weird one to have on a Wednesday. Tim, you're sick of painting gold. Well,
sucks to be you.
Yeah, there you go. Shane, Exocrines and Tyrannofexes have the same rule too. I did not know that. I haven't played NIDS in years. Well, 3rd edition. So I'll have to get hold of the new NID book and have a look. But I'm assuming they will have a similar rule in that, yeah, when they fire twice, they follow the same process. So thank you very much for letting me know, Shane, because now I'll have to go and read that because that'll get questions, I'm sure. Particularly if the FAQ comes out and changes the flying half turrets. We could see more of those on the table. Alan laughing at Courtney's pain. I can appreciate that. It's always nice. So
it's just such
it's a warm and inviting community, isn't it?
Yeah, most definitely.
GW ISAP is a must for a tablet. Can use it on a phone. Okay, hang on. I'll address Breeze in a second. I've just had Shane's come up. Can shoot all of its weapons twice in your shooting phase. Can shoot all of its weapons twice. Oh, I hate you, Shane. Now we have to go and look at the rules again because that's different to Firestorm.
Is that for the
aggressors firing twice? And that's the NIDS one, yeah, that he's just referencing there. I might have to go and find a copy of make some calls and see if I can get a copy of the Codex tomorrow and actually read what that says. My gut feeling is it'll follow the same rules as the aggressor, but Games Workshop like having slightly different wording for different things. So I'm going to assume it's the same thing. Oh, it's cough. Dice app. This was the one.
I'm just still thinking over the can shoot all of its weapons twice.
Yeah. Okay,
we're going to come back to the dice app,
yeah,
we haven't forgotten.
Yeah, give us 1 second because there's other comments about this. Do you have to declare both volleys when you activate? So, Tim, you will elect the aggressors to fire, say that they are using Firestorm to fire twice, then pick the first target, check range, check line of sight, roll to hit, roll to wound, roll to save, roll feel no pains, remove casualties, then go back to the start of that process. So you pick a new target, roll to hit, check line of sight, range, roll to hit, roll to wound, roll to save, feel no pain, all through the process. So you don't have to declare both targets, but you do have to declare using Firestorm, or I think it was called Firestorm. Now I've said it, it'll probably be called Fire something else. But it's declared before you start shooting that you're going to be firing twice.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, you do have to say that you are using that rule before you start firing. Shane says it's worded the same. Then yes, if that's the case, then the Exocrine and the Tyrannofex will follow the same rules, where you'll be able to activate it, pick a target, resolve it, pick a new target, resolve it. That's cool, Shane. I appreciate you looking for us. It's awesome. Shane just saying, sorry, it's word for word. So, no, man, it's all good. Thank you very much for your help.
Sweet.
I'll leave Courtney and Kyle and Alan to keep ribbing on each other in the comments because that's going down interestingly. So we wrote an article about virtual dice during the week.
We didn't. You did.
I did, yes.
Yeah.
Talking about the dice app specifically and some of the pros and cons for the dice app and some of the guidelines that I felt were the most appropriate ones to have for using that app in the game.
So I think the biggest guideline is that if your opponent doesn't agree to using an app, then you need to use dice, which means you need to bring enough dice with you
to cater for rolling it out.
Yeah.
Now, if that means you're only bringing 30 dice and you're rolling it 3 times, then that's up to you. I suppose there's still a lot of stigma attached to those virtual apps, and I can kind of get it because for me, it's a dice game. It's that level of interactivity, and it's much easier to blame the dice than it is to blame an app, because at that point, it's the computer screwed me, not the piece of resin or plastic that's rolling on the table.
Yeah.
It sounds stupid to say it out loud, but it's easier to blame something that you have no control over when there's a perceived level of control for a virtual device.
Oh, see, I have no level of control over anything technological. So, no, I think I have more control over the dice than I do over an app.
Yeah, so if you want to use the app, first of all, the only app we will allow to be used is Assault Dice from Games Workshop, just to make that very, very clear. No random number generator stuff, no third-party stuff. If it's not the Assault Dice app from Games Workshop, it is simply not allowed. I've seen a few apps doing the rounds where it's input all the stats for the attacker and the defender, and it tells you what the result is. No, none of that. It's at the very least, it has to be the official Games Workshop app. I actually have a fair deal of confidence in the app, even though I won't use it myself for tournaments, because it isn't a virtual number generator. It is a physics engine that creates dice in a virtual environment, which means that it's a lot harder to change the coding to cheat with it, essentially. It becomes easier to buy dodgy dice than it does to manipulate the dice app.
Not that we think that any of the players are going to buy dodgy dice.
But that is obviously a concern that a lot of players have. Like, that's one of the most common complaints, or common concerns, I should say.
It's funny because that's not a concern that I've heard at all. The only concern that I've heard over and over again is this is a dice game, and I play part of the actual experience for me is having 200 dice rolled across the table.
Yeah, that is pretty cool.
And, so I haven't heard anybody suggesting that somebody's going to cheat using a number generator, but I have heard I don't want to lose that element of the game that I love.
The tangibility, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, look, if a player says no, please respect it. Don't get upset. Don't get all cranky. Respect it. I know there's plenty of players out there that will just outright say no. I think if you do have a player say sure, I think there's a level of respect that goes into when you're using the app.
Don't use it to roll 2 dice.
No, I'd be looking at batches of 30s and 40s for those really big numbers.
Which Bree just asked, I don't think that was actually her main question. Does it have to be on a tablet? Which was one of the things that we spoke about, a tablet rather than a phone.
My biggest problem, I do have my phone here. No, I don't.
No.
My biggest problem with any of the phone style, I mean, maybe some of the more recent modern, like, the iPhone 10s and the new Samsungs,
which are about the size of our
which
iPad.
Are significantly bigger.
Yeah.
If you're running an iPhone 5 or a 6 and you're trying to roll the dice on it, it gets really hard for both players to be huddled over it to check the results. And I think there's, I suppose, a certain level of trust that has to be established in that regard, where your opponent's rolling these virtual dice that they're holding a phone in their hand that's this big, instead of
with 100 dice on it,
instead of a tablet like this where you can put it down on the table, you can see the results, and you're not sort of looking over each other's shoulders to deal with it. I, as a personal preference, if you didn't have a tablet, I'd be saying no, I don't want to use it, because I feel like there's a level of personal space that's required in life, let alone across the table, and being huddled up like that while trying to read the random numbers on a dice is on a screen that's particularly small is just a bit invasive for me. So while I would strongly suggest a tablet, if your opponent is okay with you using it on a phone and they can still have access to it and can see what's going on and all the rest of it, then I'd leave that at the player's discretion. Me personally, I would strongly suggest, if you want to increase your chances of having your opponent say yes, have a tablet. Ultimately, that's going to come down to personal preference and comfort. And look, you're going to be potentially handing your phone off to a stranger to look at the results, and that's something you have to consider. While they're not going to do a runner on it, it's still
You've got how many thousands of dollars of models on the table, and they're going to run off with your phone.
iPhone, yeah. But there's still a level of trust that goes into that. It's still a personal, private object.
Yeah.
So that's something to consider as well.
Okay, you have to excuse me a minute.
We've got a child waking up, so you'll have to bear with me. Shane, Weapon Beast. Yeah, so it's the same as the aggressors. So thank you very much for looking that up for us, man. Really appreciate it. Peter DeBonner, off topic for WATC, but new Drakari promotes patrol detachment spam, 4 CP for 3 detachments, 8 CP for 6. Will future events allow more than 2 detachments, or is this fixed for all future events? That's a funny one. I don't see any need to revise the standard detachment limits. Now, normally you get 3. WATC is only 2. At this points value, you should have access to 3. It's a deliberate curveball for the event that there are only 2. And as a Dark Eldar player, I see 0 reason to amend it. And the reason for that is, if you're taking multiple patrol detachments for the Dark Eldar, you're either running all three of the subcategories, which is obviously the Covens, the Colts, and the Cabals, which is completely possible to do without running patrols. You could run a battalion of Cabal, a spearhead of Coven, and then an outrider of Cult, and still achieve all the cool new units and mix and match them all. Patrols, this weird patrol detachment thing is, in my mind, a bit of a misleading thing. It doesn't actually achieve anything that you can't already do. And if you actually look at my example just now, where you've got an outrider, a spearhead, and a battalion, you actually get 5 command points instead of 4 from the 3 patrols. I think where the 3 patrol thing will come into play is at smaller points values where you're having less tax. But let's face it, if you're running 6 detachments to get 8 CP, there are far easier ways for Dark Eldar because they've got cheap troops, cheap HQs, and if you want the 3 Warlord trait where you can give a Warlord trait to each of your 3 different leaders, that's far easier to do than running through 8 or 6 detachments worth of requirements. So I don't actually see any need, and unless the Codex comes out and shows me something completely different, there's no need for changing any of the standard 3 detachment formats just for Dark Eldar. It doesn't make any sense to me at the moment. Maybe it will when I've got the Codex in hand, but right this moment, I don't see any need for it. And I know there's big discussions going on with like the ITC organisers, which I'm part of that group, and there's a couple of guys screaming for it, saying that if Dark Eldar want to do it, then they should have an exception that lets them take up to 6 patrols, but they can only take 6 patrols and they can't take anything else, and they have to have a minimum of this many patrols and all the other stuff. And I just feel like it's a lot of convolution for not a lot of benefit. I
kind of feel like let's actually see what the Codex says first.
Well, the fact is we've got full versions of it out online at the moment anyway.
Yeah.
But there's always these little nitty-gritty lines that are hidden in the books that you find once you actually get the book in your hands.
Yeah.
So at the moment, though, I as a Dark Eldar player don't see any need for it. I don't actually ever see me using that either. So it's interesting. Maybe the book will reveal more. Shane's being awesome. He's filling me in with all the text. Thank you very much, Shane. What time do we need people there for setup? 6 a.m. again? Absolutely. We're going to be there from 6. That's when the doors will have access to the security. And we'll be there. I know the guys from TSC have offered to give us a hand in the morning. We've got Jason Stevenson, who's also willing to come out in the very, very cold early hours of April 22nd and give us a hand. Mm-hmm. Anyone else who can make the trip down for 6 a.m., we've got 60 tables to set up in basically 2 hours. And it's going to be a massive, massive task. So
yeah, it's made slightly harder because in order to fit 60 tables in, we've had to
buy a ton of trestle tables.
And in order to do it, we've got to set the room up a certain way. So yeah, it definitely will. Yeah, as much help as we can get is going to make it as easy as possible. So yeah, we'll be there from 6 a.m. and we'll be smiling and we'll be happy and we'll be excited.
It depends on who brings us coffee. Tim Hales, I would suggest if you say no, you wouldn't be able to complain about slow play. Tim, if you can just give me a reference to that. Is that in regards to the Dark Eldar or is that in regards to something else?
I imagine that's Dark Eldar.
Kyle, to a degree, but you can expect rolling to take longer. Oh, this is about dice. It depends, Tim. If you're going to complain about slow play, there's slow play for rolling dice and then there's slow play for dawdling and moving models and unmoving models and deployment and all the rest of it. I think it's completely reasonable to call someone on slow play. It's generally got nothing to do with dice. If you watch any of the high-end event videos from Adepticon or LVO, it's not about rolling dice. Slow play, deliberate slow play is something else entirely, which might be worth covering in another topic.
I think we did cover that in the last podcast, didn't we, when we talked about win at all costs?
Yeah, we covered a little bit there, but yeah, I think when you start talking about dice, I don't believe that using the app to roll out 2 or 3 shooting phases across the whole of a game, I don't think the time saving for that app is going to be significant enough to, like, it might save you 2 minutes or 3 minutes across the course of a 2-hour game. If you are only at the bottom of turn 2 at the end of 2 hours and you claim it was because you couldn't use your dice rolling app, I'm not inclined to say that's an accurate result.
No, but the flip side of that, sometimes, sometimes 2 minutes can make a difference, but
not in 2 turns.
Yeah, no, not really.
So I don't necessarily think that the dice rolling thing, the dice rolling app, is going to save huge amounts of time. It does make it easier. It does make it neater. You're not going to knock models, and there's a whole bunch of benefits that go with it. But if an opponent says no, I don't think that absolves you from slow play. So, yeah. Yeah, Kyle essentially says the same thing. To a degree, you can expect rolling to take longer, but there is a limit to how long one can take to roll dice in a time-sensitive setting while playing a dice game. Absolutely.
I would suggest that you don't roll 200 dice individually.
Yeah, don't do that. Peter, sweet, just checking. Sounds like we can no longer mix the 3 sub-factions or we lose the obsessions. Yeah, look, I'm a Dark Eldar player from a long way back. I played a lot of, like, 2 or 3 years solid with just Dark Eldar through 5th edition, 6th edition. It's a codex I definitely want to cover on the channel. So it'll be one that you'll hear more about once I've got the book in hand, but I don't want to make 100% confirmed statements without having the book and having a chance to read it.
Guess what we're doing Saturday?
Yeah, I've got permission to go and buy a book.
Damn.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, sorry, man. It took me a second to catch up with what you were talking about. Look, rolling 200 dice, it does go hand in hand with hordes, but at the same time, I suppose the setting I want to point out is if you have got a unit of 30 Orc boys, those Orc boys have 4 attacks each. So what's that, 120 attacks? If you get 30 Orc boys to a point in the game where you are fighting with them in combat, where every one of them is within range to fight, and not one of them has been slain, take joy in the fact you get to pick up 120 dice and roll them, because that's part of the fun. Or at least for me it is. I think the circumstances where you're going to need 100+ dice are going to be so minimal because of the situation that has to take place to get to that point. I think it's far more likely that when you're rolling 50 or 60 dice for a half-strength squad that makes it to combat, or a Devil Gaunt squad that's used the stratagem to fire twice, or a full squad of aggressors firing can hit 60, 70, 80 shots. So I think that's kind of the situation where I would see the dice app being most useful. I don't think in an average game you will ever go, cool, that's an unmolested, unharmed squad, all in range, all acting at maximum efficiency. I just don't think it's a thing. So I think rolling for horde armies, again, it comes down to practice. If you're bringing 200 models to an event, whether it's WATC or any event, you should be practicing and preparing and getting ready for that event so that when you come to the table, you should be able to complete at least 4 turns, ideally 5 or more in the time frame you've got.
Yeah, and I think it's worthwhile saying that I think horde armies get a bad reputation.
For slow play.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And sometimes it's warranted, but sometimes it's not.
No.
You know, and I think it was Vincent who said after the last episode we did that both players need to take a responsibility for making sure that they're getting through that game.
Yeah.
It's not just horde players that actually hold up the game.
Yeah.
So,
well, look, I mean, Bodhi makes a point here. If you can't roll dice for that the horde army requires playing another army in comp settings, and that's almost like you can't dictate to someone they can't play an army, but at the same time, if you're realistic about your own abilities and your own ability to play the game with that army, then you might look at it and try and twist it or change it or take something different to a tournament, because from the outset, if you play 5 games in the lead up to it, the right format with a time limit beside you, whether that's with just a watch or you grab the OBSEC time, like the chess clock, so you can time your own turns and your opponents, which is what we've been doing for the games that we've been recording and putting on YouTube, you'll very quickly discover who's taking the most time, how many turns you're getting through. You can start looking at where you can start trimming some of that fat down in the way that you play the game. I mean, the practice games we've played on the channel with the casual games with friends have been 2-hour games that we've been finishing 5 turns and 1,500 points fairly comfortably. Alex and I finished a 5-turn game in about an hour and 20 minutes or something with the Necrons because they were 2 very elite armies.
Yeah.
So I think that horde armies, Owen Davis is the best example I can come up with horde armies. Owen took 260-something orcs to Masters at 2250 last year, and Owen finished games.
Yeah.
And didn't finish games because the time ran out. He finished games naturally. And when I spoke to him, he practiced and he wrote a list and he knew how to play it and he knew all the tricks and he knew how it deployed. He didn't stand there for 10 minutes thinking about which unit went where. He knew how it deployed. He knew how it needed to move. He knew how to string it out to get all the buffs and benefits. And he had a few players that came up to us during the event and went, we think this guy's like having it on. because he was that switched on and he knew exactly the process that took, and he was rolling the dice and resolving them really rapidly, and people were struggling to keep up. And it wasn't because he was cheating, it was just he knew that for him to get through all those turns in the time he had to play fast and he had to know what was happening. And there were some players that couldn't keep up with him.
But the flip side of that is that, so we talked a lot in the last pod, or whatever this is, I'm sure it was this that we talked about it, that how important it is to practice and to make sure that you're practicing against different kinds of armies. If you don't play a Horde army, it's important that you're practicing against Horde armies so that you make sure that you're holding up your end as well, and you can get through that game, and you know how how you're going to combat 200 models.
I think when you do have that real mismatch of 20 custodes versus 200 orcs,
or in the case of down in Albany where there was one model on the table.
Yeah, Hugh took a Revenant for 2,000. It was a Revenant Titan. That was it. It's 2,000 points. I think while obviously there's going to be a skew in the time used because you're moving around far less models, you're resolving far less models. There's no need for it to be a 50-50 split of time, but there's also no need for the elite army to overtake time, I suppose. Like if your turns are taking 10 minutes, that's completely fine.
Yeah.
If your turns are taking 5 minutes later in the game because you've lost models, that's completely fine. There's no need for you to rush your turns, but at the same time...
There's no need for you to go, well, I need to make sure that I have an even amount of time in this game, and he took 25 minutes for his turn, so I'm going to do the same.
Yeah, and I think the timing side of things is a really big deal at the moment because of LVO and because of Adepticon. I don't see it as being a huge issue in Perth, and hopefully the data that we recover from WATC for the amount of turns that you play, so that'll start giving us some ideas about points limits and things. Already... I have to question whether 2250 is the right number for Masters.
We're not going there. We're not going there. We're focusing on the one that's in front of us.
All right.
And we'll talk about that one. That's another thing later on.
Kyle, just to clarify around lists, if they become illegal, can we change detachments? I.e., can I change a Supreme Command to a Spearhead because using the same decks? Depends. Let's see what the books actually what we get before I start committing this to video. Which
then goes to what Alan says, practice until the list gets changed the week before. Yeah, pretty much.
On Bree says, the time issue, is chess clock something you consider for top tables or reported slow players in the future? Yes.
I'm a no.
For reported slow players, I don't have an issue with going to those players and asking them to time there's no penalty for it, but I think being made aware of it is often enough to... Those players who are genuinely not deliberately slow playing, they're just slow players, a clock can be enough to make them aware of that.
So I would encourage everyone to practice with a clock so we don't have to implement them during events.
Yeah. We don't want to go down
the
road of clocks.
No.
But if people start deliberately slow playing, then that might be an outcome. But at this point in time, we don't see the need for it.
Which means we'll argue about it later off camera.
Look, as a general rule, I'm not for it. But I think if someone's deliberately taking the mickey...
I think proving deliberate is really difficult.
Yeah, it is. But if you have a situation where there's a few guys who come to our events with the OBSEC app who track their own times to keep track of what's going on, if they are 40 minutes into a game and they haven't had turn one yet, and they come to the TO, i.e. us, and say, hey, I still haven't had my turn one, we're 40 minutes in, here's the timers that prove it, it may not be deliberate, but there is definitely an issue. And whether that is a deliberate attempt to slow play a game because they want to make sure they win, or whether it's a situation where an inexperienced player, or whether it's a player who is, like I say, just a slow player that needs to be made aware of it, it's important that that's brought to those players' attentions to go, hey, we've only got 2 hours, 2.5 hours, whatever it is. We're 40 minutes in. You're still moving. That is an issue. And that's something that if the players who are in those situations are proactive and they are using their own personal, like say the OBSEC app for iOS or whatever sort of timing mechanism they want to do, if they can come to the TO and say, here's the situation, then you can have a conversation with the player. And it doesn't have to be an aggressive one. It can be a, hey man, we're 40 minutes in. We've only got this much time. You still haven't finished turn one. Your opponent hasn't had turn one. We really need to get the game going. You can at least make them aware of it and push them to make some decisions and actually play the game and try and get the game underway, because then it becomes a frustrating exercise it's not an enjoyable experience. And that's what these events are meant to be. They're meant to be enjoyable. Competitive, yes, but You're meant to have fun. And it's no fun stood there for 40 minutes while someone ums and ahs about an inch of movement here and there because they can't decide whether they want the tank to go that way or that way. So I can see a call for it in some situations, but I don't think it's going to be the norm for us.
The only time it might be a norm is if we do it as a different style of event, and just as a way to change something up.
Yeah.
You know, something to make it a little bit of fun.
Oh, look, we've definitely talked about death clock events where it's actually part of the format where it's meant to be a bit of a test where, and we've seen it with the War Machine guys, and it's actually been really cool for some of the...
And that's what I was thinking, where 2 minutes can actually make a difference.
Yeah.
And in something like where the War Machine events, 2 minutes can make a huge
lifetime
difference. Yeah. But in a 40K event, 2 minutes, it's not really likely to make a difference.
So we might try a death clock event later in the year or next year.
It won't be this year.
Well, it could be a show.
Could be a show.
But it's one that we'll talk about, and we might test it with a small number of players to see what the feedback is, and then we'll give it back out and try something bigger if it works.
Yeah.
Bodhi, yeah, exactly, Mike. Play within your abilities and practice your horde armies, and until you have the abilities to play it. Absolutely.
That goes the same with every single army.
Every army, absolutely. That's why I've played 4 games with my Tau.
Yeah, it's doing really well.
Tim, thanks for that. I was interested to see what people thought. My instinct is that the Dice app removes some of the fun of the game, but I was wondering if it was poor form or sportsmanship to deny them the use of the app. Look, Tim, there's no right or wrong answer to using the app. I think at the moment we have to give personal preferences the benefit of the doubt. I don't think that we can arbitrarily say you must allow an opponent to use something that's not referenced in any of the books. It's a tool that could be used to play the game. So I don't think there's anything right or wrong with it. It'll come down to personal choice, and I don't think that it's fair to ping an opponent's sportsmanship score just for saying, look, I'd prefer not to use that. Because if I did it, if I had an opponent asked to use it and I said no, it wouldn't be from a place of I don't trust you. It's from a place of I prefer to roll the little resin cubes across the table.
Yep. Which is pretty much what Bree said as well.
Yep. Tim Barnard, hey, 15 models, not 20. Oh, so Tim is running the custodes, everyone. You heard it here first. How many bike captains is that, Tim?
15.
No, he's 15 models. I reckon it's going to be 5 bike captains, Tim. That's my guess. Feel free to tell me later down in the comments. Vincent, if you know you might be rolling 200 dice, pack a separate dice of 50, 100, or 200. That way you can know how many dice there are and you can just roll them straight away. You can also bring a box lid to roll them in. That way you can put them straight back in the bag without hunting around. That's a perfect option. I've actually got a box lid here, which is currently full of models. I can't even show it. But basically it's half the size of a shoebox lid, and it'd be very easy to roll 30, 40, 50 dice in that without a problem. And if you know what's in it, and you've got them all ranked up, so you go, cool, here's 50 dice, and then roll them in the box, resolve it, and then put the box away, then yeah, that actually works really well. It's a great idea. Brie, I like the dice app because 20 Gene Stealers, 80 attacks can be resolved in 30 seconds instead of 3 minutes. So I get that, and it is possible to get those 20 Gene Stealers into combat turn 1 with all of those models alive. I would suspect that it will be very rare that the following round of combat you'll have anything like all 20 of them alive. So that number is going to drop away very, very quickly. But even if that's the gimmick of the army, I don't see the rest of your turns taking huge amounts of time.
If you have, so that's 3 minutes.
Over 5 turns,
and
that's
5
15
turns,
minutes.
It's 15 minutes.
So
as opposed to it taking 2.5 minutes. Like, it's not, in the grand scheme of things, it's not taking a huge amount of time.
No, it's,
and the chance of rolling that many dice for 5 turns.
And that's kind of my point, is that it will save you a little bit of time at the front end.
Yeah, but
if you're still rolling that turn 2 and turn 3 with no casualties, the game's probably over turn 4. Because if you're rolling 20 Gene Stealers unit after unit after unit after unit,
you're doing quite well.
The game's you're gonna win the game. So I don't know. It's a weird one. Alan is so salty. Yep, no surprise there.
Nothing's changed.
Put him in Brian, he'll be fine. Vincent, yep, I've got no issues with people using the app. I just like to be prepared if using dice. Perfect. I think the majority of players will probably not care if you're only using it for 2 or 3 rolls for the course of the game. I think if you tried to use it all game, that'd get really irritating really quickly. But I think having a contingency for when someone says no is a completely appropriate thing.
No, Kyle.
See you, man. I don't agree with you, Bree. Bree says, I think it's the epitome of fairness that you get exactly half a game each. Don't agree with that at all, because 40k is so varied in terms of your army. You can't turn around and claim that you deserve an hour of a 2-hour game because you have 10 models and your opponent has 200. They do different things.
I can see what Bree means.
I can as well.
See, and that's like with the idea of running the Death Clock tournament.
Yep.
I can see that having, that you've got an hour out of a 2-hour game, you would then put together a different army than the kind of army you might bring where you don't necessarily have to have an even split of the game. But I also know, having watched so many games, that people aren't necessarily slow playing, and yet there can be a difference of half an hour in the amount of time that each player has.
But even looking purely, if you and I have the same amount of models in an army, you could say, oh no, you deserve the same amount of time. But if I've got the same amount of models, but mine activate in all 4 phases of the game, and yours only activate in 2, then there's already a disparity in the amount of time required to play the army. There's so many variables.
And the other thing is that often the games don't take the two, like you were just saying with the game between yourself and Alex, it took, I think it was an hour and 15 minutes.
It wasn't long for the 5 turns.
It wasn't at all. So if you were to say, oh, well, you get an even amount of time each, it doesn't really matter because neither of you needed it.
Yeah.
So there's too many different variables, I think, to say each player gets
if
X
you had
amount.
2 identical armies, and I mean down to the last relic and war gear item and everything, if they were carbon copies of each other,
which we did see at one of our events thanks to the Armadale boys,
then we could in theory have an argument that they deserve the same amount of time because they should take the same amount of time to play.
I don't like the term deserve, but anyway, carry on.
But you see my point is that there is a point of difference when you have 2 identical armies, that they should take the same amount of time. Whereas the second that you change something in an army, it doesn't matter how small it is. If it's a reroll, like if one model gives rerolls that it didn't before, and his aura then affects 3 units, then that's an exponential time change to resolve the units that he's impacting because they're now rerolling dice.
But the thing is, they're only exactly the same army for 1 turn.
Yeah, exactly, because whoever goes first starts shooting and then the game changes.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can ever say that it's the epitome of fairness for each person to get an hour at the scale of games that 40K is. And even the War Machine guys with the death clocks, they build lists knowing that they've got death clocks.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. I think that if you're playing a game with death clocks, it's going to significantly impact the kind of army that you're going to bring.
Yeah, absolutely. Bodie says, we're adults, try and sort it out between yourselves before the TO, but M is going to be under the pump as it is. Yep.
100%.
WATC is a big event. I don't think any of us quite grasp it until the day.
Oh, no, I'm really starting to grasp it.
If you have disputes...
It's becoming more and more real every day.
If you have disputes, go to your captains first.
Yeah.
That's what they're there for. The captains are meant to be the ones who help resolve the disputes. If the 2 captains cannot agree on a ruling, and captains, please try and be objective. I know that it's going to affect one player negatively. Captains need to look at it objectively. If you can't, then get a 3rd captain from an adjoining table.
I will get the 3rd captain from
another spot.
Yeah.
Come and get Emma, and then we'll get a 3rd captain involved to rule on it. Don't come and ask me. I'm a player. I'm not TOing. I won't be making rulings on the day.
He will be lifting and lugging tables and doing that kind of thing. But so will be many other players, hopefully.
Yeah. But no, the captains are the ones who are meant to resolve this. Once it's resolved, then that information is given to Emma so that if it comes up again at another table, we've got an acting resolution on the day. So it's really up to the captains to be on top of that. Tim, the problem I have with chess clocks is does saving through count towards your time? Saving throws, sorry, count towards your time. And is there a lot of things people can do in your turn to run the time down, particularly with stratagems that interrupt? Yeah, look.
Interesting thought.
It's something that I've been talking about with some of the ITC organisers, and there's the conversation kind of runs that as soon as the acting player is no longer the one in control of the activation, you should be hitting the chess clock. Now, by that I mean that saving throws don't count. You don't change the chess clock to roll saving throws because that's going to balance itself out across the turns because you're going to be rolling in their turn, they're going to be rolling in yours. As soon as you interrupt the sequence to do something that shoot in Eldar using the forewarn stratagem, which allows that unit to declare a target and shoot, that's a chess clock moment where you'd hit the clock and move it and take time as the Eldar player because you're the active player. So I suppose that's the best way that we can describe it at the moment. That's what's been thrown around. But we'll see. I'd be interested to see how it's implemented in the States, but it's not a concern for us at the moment. Courtney Hill, tell you what is fun, telling Alan his list is going to get wrecked. Well, I told you guys could keep playing those games. It's fine. Alan says, go to bed, Courtney. Kyle says, you're both salty.
Yeah.
Courtney says, I would say I'm typing your list out, Alan, but you need to meet it. Okay, I'm just going to... They're going a bit back and forth. There's a lot of smiley faces and stuff going on. Travis, War Machine is definitely more suited to clocks because there are far less of what you can do and what can be forced to do in your opponent's turn. No Overwatch, no saves in combat, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, absolutely, man. That's why it works so well for them. Courtney, 80 attacks for Gene Stealers is great to roll out. I agree. The soul draining from your opponent's face is worth the time. He's right. It's always good when you do that.
Nice.
Kyle with a comeback. You can both show up with 200 models, and each claim you both need more than an hour each. Absolutely, Travis. Half a game doesn't mean half the time, says Shane. Yep. And I think that's a fairly reasonable statement. As long as you're both getting the same amount of turns, then you're still getting half the game.
Yeah.
There's more back and forth from Courtney and Alan. Thanks, guys. We're still going. I'm still scrolling.
Oh, Stuart's got something in
Oh,
there.
here we go. We got something different. Stuart, how much responsibility do you think falls on players to run lists which can finish a 5-turn game?
Lots.
Everything.
All of it.
Yeah.
100%.
If you cannot finish your game, if you cannot finish 5 turns with the army list you've submitted
in the time limit
that you know about in the player's pack,
that has been there for
weeks, often months.
That's it. You're bringing the wrong list.
You should be,
or you haven't practiced enough.
Yeah. If you've got
get your butt to a club and practice,
or a store.
Yeah.
If you go down to Warhammer Baldivis and say, Stu, I need a game, WATC format, 2 hours. Do you know anyone who's coming in?
Do they have 6x4 tables down there?
Some of the stores can do 6x4s, and I'm sure if you talk to the managers at any of the Games Workshop or Warhammer stores, they will accommodate you on a quiet day. Obviously, on their game nights, it's a bit more difficult, but if you're there during the week, I'm sure that the boys can accommodate them. There's no reason why you can't be practicing. More back and forth. Scott, just kill half the opponent's units on turn 1. Time won't matter. They only deserve a quarter of the allocated time once most of the list is dead.
Perfect.
That's a very good point, Scott. Thank you. Yeah. More back and forth. Welcome, Will and Samuel. First tourney since 2003. Welcome back, Jason. I saw Jason down at the Perth Nerd Herd a couple of weeks back, and he was playing 40k and getting ready for WATC, which is awesome to see.
Yeah.
So welcome back. We hope you enjoy your first
15 years.
Yeah, and he picked WATC to do it, which is a competitive big event. So it's
but no pressure.
Yeah, it should be a very different event from what you remember, Jason. So yeah,
the events were pretty big in 2003, though. Size-wise,
not 100 players.
But, yeah. Awesome. Stuart says yes, they can do 6x4 tables.
There you go, perfect. So yeah, if you're down the Baldivis way, go and say hi to Stu at Warhammer Baldivis. He's open Wednesday to Sunday.
And late night
Thursday.
Thursday.
So go down and check out Stu. He can help you accommodate. He can help you find opponents as well, I assume. They've also got a group page you can post up on the Warhammer Baldivis or the OBSEC Gamers page, and I'm sure you can try and find games.
Bodie, Crags and Outpost is who I was talking about when I said get your butt to a club and get a game in.
Yep, Crags is Friday nights, Outpost is Tuesdays.
Yep, Crags is down at Kwinana. Can't remember the name of the place. Outpost is at South Perth, same venue as where we're holding the event.
This is an interesting one from Scott, and I'd really love to hear his response to this. I don't agree with the responsibility placed on the player for not finishing games in 5 turns or within the time limit. I don't see how it's anyone else's responsibility, Scott.
The only thing that I could argue, and it's difficult because Scott's obviously not speaking, so I'm trying to guess. The only thing that I could argue is that you can't take full responsibility because there's 2 people playing a game. So similarly to what I was saying before with the Hordes Army, where we were talking before about the responsibility of making sure that you can play that game with the 200 models. It comes down to both people who you're playing.
Obviously, it's an interactive game, and there has to be. I suppose if you practice and you can finish 5 turns against a variety of opponents, if you're playing the same guy week in week out with the same list, you're going to get faster, both of you. Yes, against each other,
against that one list, playing with that one opponent who their quirks and how they move, and
yeah. I think the onus. Maybe we weren't, or maybe I wasn't necessarily clear in that regard. But I suppose the point is that if you are confident that against the majority of players that you meet across the table that you can play 5 turns with the army that you've got.
Maybe not majority, but a multitude of players.
I think the majority of armies will fall into a roughly similar scale in terms of interactivity and model count. There's the outliers, obviously, with Tim's Tim's Custodes and then the Owen's Orcs. But I think the majority of armies will sit somewhere in the 40 to 80 model range.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you know that you can complete a game against a player with 100 models in 2 hours at 1,500 points, and you can complete a technical game against an army of 20 models in 2 hours at 1,500 points, anything outside of that becomes an outlier. So the smaller games should obviously be faster. The longer games just require you and your opponent to have a 2-minute conversation and go, right, we need to get 3 or 4 turns. How can, let's make this happen.
Yep.
So there does have to be a little bit of interactivity, but I think that the onus still has to be on both players.
Well, if each player has the responsibility to make sure that each player can get through 5 turns in the 2 hours or 2.5 hours, whatever it is per game in the event, well, then you're at a point where everyone should be finishing.
Yeah, exactly. So,
but you can only take responsibility for yourself.
Exactly. So as long as everyone comes with the same mentality of wanting to finish those games, then there shouldn't be any issue, particularly if they've practiced it and are prepared for it.
Yeah.
But no, look, I mean, I suppose it was a bit hasty for me to reply that, Scott, so thank you very much for raising that.
If that's actually what you wanted.
Jason says Stratagem has 6x4s as well. Yep, we've actually been talking to Stratagem a little bit to help them get their first event off the ground, but we'll cover that another day. And Bree answering Scott, which I think we've just covered. Timo says you can play on Sunday at Skulls 40k, 4 games, same point value as WATC, 4 training games. He's absolutely right. That's the weekend.
And you can win stuff like that.
That's always good, Timo.
Yeah.
The Skulls 2018 is the week prior, I believe, because I know a few of the boys are going to it. Obviously, with the week out from WATC, that's not something I can attend.
No, because I'm working.
Oh, there you go. Scott, I just think that if both players are built lists to outlast one another, absorb damage, then models are going to be still on the table. Considering that some attacks result in more than one save, resolving attacks is time consuming. Yeah, look, it's a good point, Scott.
It is, but I still don't think it should stop you from being able to finish 5 turns. It's just that there's still going to be models standing at the end of those 5 turns.
Yeah, look, I kind of get what he's saying, that if you've got 2 attrition armies that don't do damage and just kind of block each other, you're still rolling all the dice, but you're going to be rolling the same amount of dice. It's not going to deteriorate.
Every time it's not going to diminish, yeah.
But I suppose, if both players are of the mindset they want to get through those turns and they've practiced knowing that their army is not going to deteriorate as rapidly as a typical army might, then you should still be practicing to get to 5 turns. Timo says there is a minor detail that's a slightly different restriction, but yeah, he's right. It's a very close copy to WATC's format.
Something that Alan said earlier, but yes.
Scott, in addition, if both players have the same experience discussing rules interpretations, then as long as the game is fair, that's the result that should matter. Look, I agree, Scott, that as long as both players get the same amount of turns, that's the main thing. But at the same time, I think it's disingenuous to say that the game has resulted in a fair conclusion if you only play 3 turns. The game is a 5 to 7 turn game to decide the winner, and there are plenty of armies that are built for late game victories.
And if you only get
3 turns, then it's only going to favour one player. So I think the game is designed to finish no earlier than turn 5. So the goal should be to finish at least 5 turns, so that you get to the 15-minute warning mark and go, okay, can we finish turn 6? Should we roll for turn 6? If you've got 2 minutes to go, no, we can't do that. It's game over. We've finished what a standard game should be.
Mm-hmm.
But, I suppose that's my opinion. Timo says, weekend of 14th and 15th for Skulls. 40k is on Sunday. He's spelled it wrong, but that's okay. Sunday the 15th, end the plug. Thank you, and out. Yep, no worries, Timo. Skulls is always good fun. Russell always does some cool stuff for the day, so go down and check it out if you want a weekend practice prior to WATC.
And I believe 30k is happening on the Saturday.
Yeah, yes it is. And they've got a few other game systems happening on that weekend as well.
God, we've got to get more comfortable chairs. These are killing me.
I paint on these chairs.
Oh, they're awful. I'm a real wriggle pot.
Anyway, guys, we've been going nearly an hour and a half now. Thank you.
And these are really uncomfortable chairs.
Thank you very much for everyone who stuck around until the end, particularly if you started with us at the very start.
I'm really sorry to Simon, who's just joined us.
Oh, has he?
Yeah, Simo.
Oh, yes, of course. Sorry, Simo. But look, we hope you've kind of gotten some stuff out of this. And look, it's really great being able to interact with you guys and have you guys ask questions and provide feedback.
Grumpy face again?
It's because you're grumpy because you've got a dodgy chair.
Oh, okay. In that case, I agree with you.
There's a little bit of a time delay. Remember, they're seeing it a little bit later than us. Okay. What was I saying?
I think we were saying goodbye.
Yeah, thanks very much for everyone who's hung around and watched the whole thing. If you've just joined us more recently, you can go back and watch it. It'll be up on YouTube tomorrow. Now that I know how to edit it and post it to YouTube. Yeah. If you've got any other questions for WATC, ask them to your captains. Get them posted in the Captain's Council so we can keep it all in one spot.
2 days till lists are due.
Lists are due.
We're still taking questions.
Midnight Friday. And then if we get any firm data, if I get anything from anyone I know in regards to firming up that date of release, then obviously we can address that. Yep. But at the moment, it's business as usual.
That's it. We're going with what we've got.
And we'll address the other issues if and when they pop up. So thank you. Oh, of course, there's more bloody comments now. I've said that. Cheers, guys, for the answers. Thanks for organising and putting this on. I've yet to have a game last more than 4 turns. Shane, stop playing.
You need to practice your game, Shane.
Shane plays 20,000-point games. That doesn't count. Lots of thank yous from everyone. Mike, when are we having our first 30K game for the YouTube channel? I'm happy to organise that with you, Timo. I've still got my Emperor's Children here. It won't be a huge game, but I can definitely do a game with you.
Like 7 points.
No. It's more than that, but
might be.
It's not going to be 2,500. I'll give you the tip. But yeah, I'm happy to organise that with you, Timo. So get in touch via a PM direct to me, man, and we'll sort out a time to do that. That's completely cool. Stuart, that's because you're a tortoise, Shane. No, he's not. He just plays games that are inordinately huge. It's not his fault that he's a bug. Yeah, look, thanks very much for all the kind words as well, guys, and for all the thanks. We hope you enjoyed the chat. If you've got anything else, let us know. Otherwise,
I hope you actually got something from this
hour
and a half of dribble.
Otherwise, we've got the YouTube channel, like we've mentioned a couple of times, with a bunch of games and stuff on it. And we've got new content going up as quickly as we can. We've also got the podcast that comes out every second Wednesday. So it alternates with this live stream. So
we only do this once a fortnight, which is once every
2
weeks.
And
was it Stu who was telling people that we're on every Wednesday?
Yeah, Stu was telling us we're on every Wednesday.
Sorry.
We alternate it so we actually get some other stuff done. And if you've got any other topics you want to suggest for the live ones or for the podcast, by all means get in touch. If there's any games you want to see on the YouTube channel in particular, let us know. We're going to start putting some competitive tournament games up for those as well. So yeah, anything else you want to send through, let us know. Otherwise, hopefully of course there's more.
Of course.
All right. Everyone's saying they're done. We're done. Stay safe. Have a good night, guys. And we will see you soon.
We will.